So I'm going to talk about the proactive approach for creating inclusive community resources. And this is just out of what I have done within the homeschooling community. And I really want to give you an idea of how that can translate into a more local way of translating your outreach to your families to become more inclusive to what they live 24/7 versus just ministry within your church. And I'm going to be, I love giving examples and stories, so that's what it's all about. So we're first going to talk about circumstances and my research. My research started by non-choice. We all get involved in disability or disability ministry somehow. It affects us or it affects somebody else. So my non-choice was my son was diagnosed on the spectrum when he was 5. And that dove me into the disability world. But I had already been involved in the disability world. My parents actually joined it by choice. I am the oldest of 4 biological siblings, but I have 10 adopted siblings, all who have special needs. My parents actually specifically adopted my siblings because of that. My mom always said when she adopted my first sibling, she's like, we want them not to be mobile so that when we get old, we don't have to chase them. So now, in their almost 80s, my parents still have 2 kids at home and they're very mobile. That didn't work out. God had other plans. But I have counseled probably over 1,000 families in my almost 2 decades in working with families in the homeschooling community that have been affected by disability, working for different state organizations, and then starting SPED Homeschool in 2017. And so I have found that as we have been, our circumstances have not been by choice, but we're kind of in these circumstances. So the barriers that are pretty common in all the families that I have dealt with is that there's isolation. And mostly there's isolation because parents, when I've talked to them, they say, well, we don't go because we don't know where to go. It's not usually by choice that we want to isolate ourselves, but we don't know anything but where to go because our life is so busy that we just stay home because that just seems easier. And then change happens. And just this last week, or past month actually, my friend Dawn has a daughter who has a very rare genetic disorder, and they're in and out of the hospital all the time, and these changes are happening constantly, and I'm getting texts, well, we don't know what's going on here, but now this is what's happening with her heart. And it's like living on the edge, and not a lot of people will travel on that edge with them. And I have another friend, Lisa, who has an adopted son who lives down the street from me. She's my bestie. But Noah, her son, is in a place of transition. And so change is happening for them because time is changing and it's causing us circumstances to change. As we all know families that face those changes. What do we do after school? And then there's this misunderstanding because when we try to tell people what's going on with their child and then things change, we don't really know what to tell them again because we're like, I wasn't lying. And so it just causes a lot of barriers for inclusion for our families. And as we all know, just by what I said, a disability is not static. We don't get a diagnosis and then it stays the same. It changes because of different circumstances that we can control or just time in general. So powerful ministry really the impact requires that we share in these burdens and these circumstantial needs, not just that we just tell them about Jesus, because they don't always get the translation of how is Jesus in this. And so that's where the power of our ministry can come in when we move into these places. And because your families don't live in your church. I'm assuming that you don't have residential housing in your church. And neither do most of the people that serve them. And I have learned that the ministry base is not just the people that I serve with disability, but it's also the people that serve them. And I need to be a bridge in between those two groups. in order to get my families better resources, but also to help those resources get better. So we enter into the isolation, and here's how we do it. First of all, we don't fill our schedules. I tell homeschool parents this all the time. Don't overschedule, because you don't leave room for God when you put too much on your schedule. So leave some spaces open where you're not programmed so that you have time for those godly interruptions. And then listen. Listen to these families, not so that you can tell them what to do, but so that you can understand better their circumstances. Because we assume a lot of times what our families are going through, but we don't spend the time actually listening to them. And then we need to equip them. We need to equip them on how to relate to others. Our society in general needs to learn how to relate to each other. They just don't know. And so I have learned that we need to train people on how to befriend a friend. And somebody that maybe doesn't have a disability can be your friend. They just have to be open to learning. And how do you create those relationships? How do we initiate those relationships? How do we go through the messy places of our lives and be okay with asking for help or telling people about the hard stuff and getting vulnerable? And then we provide opportunities. We provide zero entry practice for families to be able to start working on those skills within our church, within maybe an outreach event, just so they can kind of get their feet wet, because it's scary to start being vulnerable with other people. So the next thing that we have to do after we enter into the isolation is we facilitate that. And I have been really intentional. My ministry is international. So a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about that I've done have been in various places. This you can take more locally, depending on however your ministry works. But I have realized that I need to create relationships with businesses. And so what I have done is, as a homeschooler in the disability realm, is I have reached out to curriculum providers and said, here's what you need to do. Here's what parents are talking to me that they want from you. Can you give this to them? And helping them to understand better the laws in every state and how they're different and what's required, how they could come alongside them with those things. I talk to therapists of various kinds, letting them know what our parents are looking for because the schools aren't providing them as homeschoolers. We talk to state organizations. What's their legislation say? Are they actually translating that legislation to their population properly? And so I have kind of been the conduit to these businesses about the types of resources that they need to be. And then also going to local events. Now, I've went to national events. I spoke at the Homeschool Trade Association and said, I want you to live a day in the life of a family who homeschools. And a lot of them were different vendors. And I said, now, this is what's involved in a day in our family's homes. And how does your curriculum or how does your product fit into that? And could you make it better to fit into that space? I've gone to various leadership conferences and also just help them to better understand. And the same thing that you can do, you know, if you have local business meetings, share. This is what the disability community in our area is doing. This is what they need. This is what they need from your businesses. If you have the opportunity to do that, share. And then provide training. What I have done is I've even gone to business and said, your website right here needs to change because this is not disability friendly. Or for a parent who has ADHD, which a lot of times the child has ADHD, so does the parent. The child has autism, so does the parent, as we learned just previously. And there's so much busyness going on, we can't find anything. So I would encourage you to really clean this up and make your categories smaller. And one business turned around and said, we're going to cover that in 2 days. We're going to have it done. Because I reached out and then a parent came back to me and said, thank you, I can finally find everything on this website. So, and then further provide training as I have turned to to businesses and said, I want you to watch this video that I created. I want you to read this blog that we have on our website, because this is going to help you. And people always are more open if you personally invite them. And so I've invited, I have a live broadcast, and so I've invited a lot of the businesses that I've been working with to come on my broadcast so that the families can get to know them. And then on the other side, I've allowed the families to facilitate interaction by doing lives instead of pre-recording, because my family sometimes can't get out of their homes and they want to interact with these experts, but they can't go to conferences and other things. So I make sure that my broadcasts are live. We do turn them into podcasts, but then also the night before we send out an email saying, if you can't even make the live, send your questions to me ahead of time. We'll include them, and then maybe when you can download the podcast, you can figure out how your question was answered. So just trying to figure out and that I found out by asking my community, what do you need? How will you best interact with the information that we create? And they said, well, we really like podcasts. And so that was one way that we could bring and bridge that gap. And then just create ways for families to share resources. Your families are like research experts. They know everything about everything. And if you allow them to be able to share who's your favorite doctor, who's your favorite dentist, all of those things, everybody in that community is going to benefit. And they're going to feel empowered, too, that they have resources to be able to share. So to help them with that, we have a Facebook group that does this, and these parents love that. We have to moderate it very well, and we've even been told by parents, I feel so loved in this community because we jump on things. If there's something in there that is not about support, it's gone. But when you do that, they know that you're really taking care of them too. And then just being able to maybe maintain a list of accessible resources. And I heard this morning in the first session, they were talking about some churches who even have resources you could lend out. So just be thinking about ways that you can jump in to the lives of your families that you've been called to serve. And that's how we create inclusive community resources. And so I have a podcast. It's actually produced by Salem Media, the largest Christian conservative broadcasting network. They just started a podcast group. It's called Life Audio. And so you can find Empowering Homeschool Conversations on there. And then our website is spedhomeschool.com. Thanks.